Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College, and today I'm here with Mark Person, class of 1978, and today is February 15th, 2022. Mark, tell us a bit about your background, where you grew up and went to high school, and how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lynda. My background is I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and I attended Richmond Public Schools. Went to Westover Hills Elementary, and at the time, Westover Hills Methodist Church, and later to George Wythe High School. And the connections there, one of the members at the church, Hal Watson, who was a graduate of Randolph-Macon, had known Coach Hugh Stevens. He was a baseball coach here, and somehow they were friends socially too, and I never knew that at the time. But my senior year at George Wythe High School, I'd played baseball for a coach, Paul Soucy. Coach Soucy his dad was a major leaguer. Coach Soucy was a standout pitcher at Auburn University, and his brother pitched for the Boston Red Sox. So at the time, I played tennis and baseball at George Wythe, and my brother Jim had gone there also, and we knew a lot of the families, the Estes family. We grew up down the street, and we played basketball at the courts, and they played softball with us. And another connection was I worked in the toy stores called K&K Toys. And I was a stock boy. I was on my way. I was making $1.75 an hour. And a couple of gentlemen that owned it is a gentleman named Macon Brock and Doug Perry. And they were real good business people, and that business later became Dollar Tree. And I would see Mr. Brock around. I said, I sure wish I had bought a few of those stock shares back then. Just real nice gentlemen. But at Randolph-Macon, the connection, so my senior year, I loved music too. I played the trumpet in the school band and very active. And we went through the busing era. It was forced integration, so it was some challenging times, but for me it was real good. I learned a lot from the ball fields and just being around people. Diversity was all around us, and we just accepted people for what they were. Well, my senior year, I had signed up. I was actually accepted to Virginia Tech. I was going to go to their electrical engineering school, and pretty much set, and I could play in their band, and everything was pretty much set in stone. Well, playing tennis, my heroes at the time, Richmonder Arthur Ashe. This is right in the period where he won Wimbledon, I think in 1976. And we worked at our sports a lot and had to study. Those teachers I had were strict. I can think of the classes, they challenged us a lot. But my senior year, I started the baseball team. I started having a real good year and ended up making the all-capital district and all-metro baseball team. Well, it gets in the newspaper, and they're like, I think 10 or 11 of us, the pictures taken, it's in color back then, and we didn't have the cell phones and social media we do now. So I said, well, everybody then that was in the Richmond News Leader. So again, this is right in June of 1978, and I noticed the gentleman, Coach Soucy, was well connected. These coaches all knew each other, and Coach Soucy had sent a lot of players up to Manatee Junior College, and a few of these guys became pros. And the power of a telephone call, these networking of these gentlemen, next thing I'd noticed, this nicely dressed gentleman coming out to the games, and he said, he kind of pointed, Coach Soucy, he said, that's Coach Stevens over there. He's come to watch you play ball. And I said, oh. So and he had followed the newspaper, and I'd had a few clippings. So next thing, we were going into the summer, and I played American Legion baseball for Amelia post 87. It was a gentleman named George Hardy that coached. His son went to VMI, Bill. We still stay in touch too. So Coach Stevens, they said it's a gentleman sitting in the stands, Hugh Stevens, and Coach Hardy knew him too. I said, you guys know each other. And they weren't texting, they're like picking up the phone. So as we get towards July, and I'm getting ready to head up to Blacksburg, Coach Stevens says, well, son, and he was a real nice gentleman. I'm like 18 years old. He said, we'd like, if you consider Randolph-Macon coming up to Ashland. And I said, to play baseball, and I think he had a baseball with him. I said, well, that's kind of nice. I can extend my playing career. And so that's kind of what happened. So, and Merle Barton was the financial aid person, so they worked it out. And I said, well, I guess we can afford it. My parents were very supportive, and so I contacted Virginia Tech, said had a little change of mind. I'm going to be heading up to Ashland, and I appreciate your accepting me, but I'm heading up to Randolph-Macon, the center of the universe, we call it. So when I get to Randolph-Macon, somehow the paperwork, I show up about a week early. I didn't know a soul here, so maybe they thought I was somehow the football team maybe would practice early. So I said, well, I'll stay here. This is nice environment. And they said, you're going to be staying in Bennett Hall. And I said, okay. And so they showed me where Bennett Hall was. And the old rooms there were bunk beds. So I met a gentleman, Henry Talifero. He said, I can help you out. We get you some cinder blocks. And so they split the bunk beds, and I had one side of the room, and my roommate, the new roommate, Richie, had the other side. And so this worked out. So I got my own little place here. And at those times, the doors we just left unlocked, and if you can imagine having a payphone back then. So there was a janitor's closet that had the payphone. So we had to have like 10 cents. It might have been 25 back then. And finally, the other students started coming in. We had orientation. I said, I'm set. I'm grown up now. I'm at college. So the old days, you would go physically, and wasn't anything we didn't have computers. That's really dating myself, but we would go in, they'd have your name listed and what classes you wanted to do. And so I guess they were saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? So I said, well, Major League Baseball player. I didn't say that. I said, well, I'm here for academics, which definitely was true. But so we enrolled in the classes. You were required then, actually Randolph-Macon was one of the schools that you still had to take phys ed. And I remember taking Helmut Werner, was the soccer coach, legendary here. And I said, in public schools, we had there were three sports. There was baseball, football, and basketball were the main three, and soccer, one school, Thomas Jefferson and Richmond had it. But then I said, lacrosse, that looks like fun too. And I'm thinking, I said, well, then they've got a tennis team. Maybe I can play all these sports, but I was focused on baseball. So Coach Werner, I can still remember our gym outfits. We practice, and those coaches, I think, used it a little bit as a recruiting tool too. I'm pretty naive to this, but he was very enlightening, and he gave us some conditioning tips. And then as you start getting your way around, we were co-ed too, which I became friends with a lot of the women that were here, and they played tennis. So I still had a passion for tennis, and so we would play fall ball for baseball. But my first year as a student, I remember we took the traditional history, and you had to take a language. I'd taken Spanish in high school, and Professor Robert Barrett was my counselor, and so I said, well, I'll try German, fascinating language. And I had a gentleman, Dr. William Noe, and just a prince of a guy. He was very inspirational. And back then we were required to go in the language lab. You had sit maybe 1 or 2 hours in the language lab, and you had the headset, and they had the reel-to-reel tapes back then, and you could hear, and I had a southern drawl, so I said, I'm trying to work on my southern drawl in German. They would tease me, and so that I liked German a whole lot, and ended up taking the second year and then the third year, and I was very immersed in the German culture. So Dr. Noe, though, he said, well, he was also an ordained minister, Episcopalian, if I remember correctly, and just real worldly person. His wife, Anita, was very connected to the Richmond Symphony. He said, well, we have an Oktoberfest out of this place called Stonecliff, and if you'd like, we'd like you can come park the cars. I said, well, that sounds like it'd be great. Had a beautiful place, and so I go out there, and I said, these are some nice cars, and like a few Mercedes out there. I said, just don't wreck one of these. And so I managed unscathed, and he asked me back the next couple years, so that was real special. But I stayed with the German language. I liked it a lot. We studied Goethe, and I would come in the library here, and it was just, the library's great, and I'd sit and find the German section and try to, translate the German to English and vice versa, and so very challenging. So that was a great experience. Later, my senior year, when I'm talking about Dr. Noe, they had, you call it the J term now. Back then we called it the colloquy. So again, I'm playing baseball for Coach Stevens, and I said, Coach Stevens, I've got an opportunity to go to Europe. They have a colloquy with Dr. Noe. And I said, I don't want to, I'm scheduled to start, this is my senior year. And I'm like, this could be an exciting year. And a lot of us that came in together were seniors that year. So he said, I said, we're going snow skiing too. I've never been on skis. He said, and Coach Stevens he smiled. He said, just don't break a leg. And I said, well, I promise I won't, but I don't want to jeopardize my spot. He said, well, you'll be all right. So it was a 3-week trip. So Dr. Noe, we get on the airplane and take off. It was a KLM Royal Dutch Airline, if I remember correctly, and tied into Germany. And the best trip I've had in my life. So it exposed us. I'd grown up Richmond and Ashland, and we'd seen, travel to the state and a few other states. And so we get over there. We go to Switzerland, go to Germany. We're in Munich, and Mad King Ludwig, the castles of Bavaria. If anybody's seen I think the Disney Channel, when they show the castle, that's Neuschwanstein. And Dr. Noe was well connected. We're went to the Hofbrauhaus, and that was a nice time too. And it was 25 of us approximately. And we took pictures, and then we go to Amsterdam, Holland, went to Anne Frank's house, and this puts the perspective of the Holocaust. We were actually physically in the house, and then we went to Dachau, the German concentration camp, and we went through the red light district, and this wasn't, we were 18 through 21 years old, and it was an enlightening experience. It wasn't, we weren't sheltered from it. He wanted us to see it. And then on the finale, and we were graded in the class, we had course work each day, and we would take tests over there. So a bunch of anxious students were our attention span, we tried to keep it. It was just amazing, gorgeous sights all through Europe. And so the finale, the option for the third week is we could go snow skiing in Austria. So we'll twist my arm, and we managed to say yes. So we go to Innsbruck, Austria, and Steuben. And Innsbruck had been where they'd had the Winter Olympics. Anybody that's seen the Wide World of Sports, the Thrill of Victory and the Agony of Defeat, this is the ski jump, if I'm not mistaken, where the skier wipes out. We walk up to the top, and it took about a half hour to get up there. It's just chilling the view. And I took a picture. I had a camera. I'm like 35 millimeter is a Ryko. I probably should have taken an Instamatic. So I think I had maybe 21 pictures that turned out, and the one that turned out was the picture of the ski jump. And years later, Dr. Noe passed away a few years ago, but I met him up here for a homecoming and presented the picture to Dr. Noe, and that picture's in Haley Hall. So he used to drive a Volkswagen, and I had one too, Volkswagen being German. And he would correct me on the pronunciation. He would say, Volkswagen. I said, yes, sir. But I came up to school when the language department met. They were very cordial, and I presented it to him. And afterwards, we walked. It was probably a half a mile walk. We walked back, and a year later, he passed. So,
I interviewed Dr. Noe a few years ago. I can't remember exactly what year, but for Making Memories. And he talked about taking students to Europe. And his was one of the very first study abroad trips the college had, if not the first. And it was in the summer in 1966 or 67, around that time, that he first took a group of all men at that point to Germany. And I believe they did like a 3-week summer trip. But yeah, he was wonderful exposing so many students.
One thing he did too, we were, if you can imagine, so we're in a chalet, and first time I'd ever put a set of skis on. A lot of the people on the trip were from up north, and they were like probably experts. And I can remember, and I'm ignorance is bliss, so I was the last one in line to get to pick my skis out. So they said longer, faster. I said, well, yeah, that sounds good. And I can remember coming down a hill. There was one of the instructors' name was Hilga. And I said, well, this couldn't be that hard. And I think after about 10 times falling down, I got the hang of it a little bit. And I'm coming down one of the slopes and got a lot of speed, and I managed to wipe out the whole rack of skis. And he said, takes a little practice. And Dr. Noe was skiing too, and very good at it. And there was a couple guys that went skiing. They couldn't find them. They got lost, and there was an avalanche coming. And he's like, cool as a cucumber. Another thing he did too, and I'll share this, Dr. Noe hypnotized someone on a trip. And we're like sitting around, and when about a few years back, the year before Dr. Noe passed away, a group of us for a homecoming got together and honored him and shared our stories. But one of the gentlemen was actually hypnotized, and we were teasing him, and he had him doing all kinds of antics, and he still to this day couldn't remember it. So he had a lot of talents, but they said, well, we're going to have to leave this chalet now because the avalanche is coming, or we'll be snowed in. And we looked around, we said, well, that would be okay. They might miss us in Ashland, but somehow we got on the train and went to Switzerland, and a gorgeous area there too, the Black Forest. And so we made it back. And so then when we got back to Ashland, Coach Stevens says, well, looks like you're all right. He said, baseball practice on Monday. I said, okay. So I passed the class and lived to tell about it. So, but
those are wonderful memories. That's great.
Too.
It seems like you remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, so tell us a little bit more about when you were on campus. You mentioned you lived in Bennett. How things, just what things were like living on campus. We'd been co-ed for a few years at that point, but still probably majority male. And
yeah, Bennett was a real exciting time, and we had guys from various backgrounds. So we were at the last part of the last dorm, I guess, in that section. The old cinder block walls, I remember, and I rode through there today, and they scaled it up. It looks real nice, and it was nice for me. But again, we were fighting over that. We had to work a schedule, so we would have maybe 15 minutes to call our girlfriends or relatives and share it. And they had a lot of whatever the elements were in that closet. You come out of that closet feeling pretty good. So had like detergents and all, and I said, I'm a little headache, it's kind of, but we survived it, and that phone was always working, so we kept it, and we shared the time and the slots, and then after I noticed after my first semester, one thing, and a pride thing in all families, but my dad would say, you want to make the grade. My dad had been a World War II veteran. He was out in the South Pacific. His ship was the USS Dunlap, so these guys had a lot of stories. He was an old baseball player, too. He said, just don't embarrass me, and my mother, too, and they were all very high on education. He said, I don't want to have to tell the boys that you didn't make the grade. So I'm like studying. We would practice baseball, fall ball, and we'd go, Coach Stevens would say, walk to class, but on the ball field you hustle, you run. He said, and we would work out usually, I think, like 3 until 6 or 5:30. And so the coming back to Bennett Hall, that first semester, we'd get the grades, and it wasn't anything on a computer. They'd mail them to your parents.
Right.
And I said, well, I think I've passed, and I get home, and I guess you're there. Well, let's see what the grades are. And they said, well, you passed. And my dad would say, well, looks like you're making the grade so far, son. I said, yeah, it's a whole lot of pressure and a whole lot of stuff. I'd be in here some nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, and Fox Hall, they would leave open. And I don't know if they still do all-nighters, but, you're playing sports and you don't want to flunk anything. So I'd go in there and stay until wee hours of the morning, got to know the guards pretty good, and come back, and it was quiet in there. But it was like an open door, they're like, hey, we want you to excel. Well, when I came back after my freshman year, the first semester, I said, looks like a lot of these boys aren't here anymore. They must have decided, and they didn't pass. I didn't make the grade, so to speak, and it was a whole lot of vacant rooms. And I remember one of the parents came back. He said, have you seen my son? I said, no, sir, I haven't seen him since. And a couple of them didn't make it back. So it's a school that you're on your own, and it's up to you, and you do your best. But if you don't study, you might be looking for other opportunities. So that made an impression. Plus, Coach Stevens would call you in his office, and he said, well, what do you think? Can you maybe get that C plus up to a B? I'm like, how does he know what my grades are? And I said, oh, yes, sir. He said, and I was getting a little bit of scholarship money, too. And I said, well, I don't want to take that scholarship away. So he said, well, good job, son. Just we got practice. And so that was freshman year. That was Bennett Hall. And I got to meet a lot of the people, Tim Nasworthy I still see. He was in that hall too. Mark Allen, a couple guys that I still see around. And there were also the women, like in Mary Branch, Doris Schneider, she was there, Meg Evans, Mary Wolverton. They just had a get-together up in Maryland this past year, and I went back, and we've stayed in touch there. So there was a real strong connection and a great group of guys. We still see each other, and with social media, we talk and see what's going on in each other's lives. So that's a nice feeling. But we call it the old Bennett boys, and they also had midnight janitor. They called them. Sometime it was a little crazy, but someone would get on a cart and just ride up and down the hall and wake us up about midnight, and then we just go back to bed. So a lot of things happening. I said, this is different. So it was nice time there. So that was Bennett. So then the sophomore year, I moved to Star, and that was, I think, next to it or one or two down. And room with a gentleman, Chip Lilly. He became an attorney. We still stay in touch. We've been on the alumni committees together and done real well. He was in Tidewater, and I would go visit. When I was a student, we would go there. My dad had this car. It was called an Electra 225, and we were pretty. If I had access to a car, I'd like it back then. We're here. If you needed the car, just take it. And so Chip told me one time. He said, "Yeah, use that." We called it a deuce and a quarter, is what the term was. As big as a Cadillac. And he told me he drove it to the eye doctor one time, and he said that was quite an experience riding that old big car. And I said, "Well, you made it back, no dents." And I had a Volkswagen up here one time and thought about Dr. Noe. And also that freshman year we went to my brother, and there were three of us. We had a spring break and went to Disney World. It was when the first, I guess, the Epcot Center was built. And went to Daytona Beach, and it was the old, people were taking bets on whether or not we would make it. It was a city van that we had converted. It's an old yellow city van with Bondo in it. That's old putty, and the column stick shift. So we managed to make it. My brother became an educator up Northern Virginia, a principal. And he follows the Yellow Jackets as much as I do on the sports. And he went to William & Mary. And then another gentleman on that trip became a doctor and pilot in the Navy. And I said, so the Daytona guys, that we made it back safely, and that old van we sold quickly after that. But so the sophomore year, Star Hall, I met this gentleman, Mike Pandak. And we became real good friends. And at that time, I'm playing baseball, and my freshman year, a gentleman, Joey Faree, who played years, I still see Joey up here. I got a bid to pledge for Lambda Chi fraternity and accepted the bid, and that was so Michael Pandak was also given a bid, and we became real good friends and pretty inseparable back in school. And we roomed together we were in the fraternity house the last couple of years, junior and senior year, and his aspirations were to become a doctor, and he's done real well, so we still stay in touch. He played basketball too, and the basketball teams in that era, Hal Nunley was coaching. My freshman year, Paul Webb was the coach, and his son Eddie played. There were I think 4 Pauls and Fletcher Johnson. At that time, they were Division II, and I remember them playing. They would go head to head. They played Old Dominion, was a real big rival back in that day. And great teams, and Michael had been recruited out of Stanton, Virginia. He went to Riverheads High School. His dad had been a coach. I take that back. Stanton Military Academy is where he went. And but his dad had been a real good coach, and he ended up coming to Randolph-Macon too, and quite the scholar. Michael was real good for me too, because he was real regimented, had that good military background, and he would get up a certain time and go to bed by 11, where I'd probably be making popcorn at 11. So I said, well, he's a good influence. He's a doctor, so fantastic guy. There were a lot of the new dorm we became friends with a lot of the women that were there. And we've stayed in touch. Annie Homans Johnson, we still stay in touch. Susan King. I'll see them at homecomings, and I'll occasionally we'll get together too. So just real strong connections. There was right by the Wash Frank Hall in that era, and that group, we would sometimes go ice skating. They had a rink. And I'd sprained my ankle a few times playing baseball, and sliding into second will do that. And my legs, so that will strengthen your legs quite a bit. But when Randolph-Macon, when it would rain here, there would be a little pond over near Wash Frank Hall, and we were maybe innovative, and someone had a set of skates, and so being ambitious students, we would just leave the set of skates, and if anybody was daring enough, they could skate that next time. And so I got a little bit better at ice skating, but it was a little section that was our ice skating rink here, and we would just skate right around Wash Frank Hall. I was also, they were going to demolish that building back in that era, and we all were opposed to it and said, let's save Wash Frank Hall. So that's
Good.
nice. Yeah, so it's nice. My family, it's very historical, and I'll share some thoughts with you too about the early days of Randolph-Macon. But so then my junior year, we're in the baseball team. Coach Stevens, I'll talk about him a little bit if it's okay. So Coach Stevens, Hal Watson, back to my high school and church days, they knew each other, and I ended up coming here. So Coach Stevens was very disciplined. He's a real gentleman. He expected us to wear the coat and tie on the buses, and kind of the image today, you're representing the school, and we had very good teams. A lot of guys, David Bristow, Greg Waters, John Bueller, Ben Ashton came here, Bernie Birchall, they were all in my group. And so he stressed, he said, I want you guys to play ball, but I want you to graduate. And that was a given. And but so here we are, college students, and we thought we were major leaguers. I said, that buses, I'm used to the high school days. We're like, you throw 10 guys in a car and get there, and back to that old car of my dad's, the deuce and a quarter. If you don't have enough room, put one in the trunk. No, we didn't do that. But he was very organized, and he was also the athletic director, and just real scholarly. He had been a standout pitcher back when he was at Randolph-Macon, and Mrs. Stevens, his wife, they would have us over to eat. We'd have a little cookout at their house, but the teams, he would have a typed out. I said, he's real orderly too, and said the bus leaves at 2:00 or whatever, and if you weren't on that bus, he didn't care. You're gone. He said you can be riding to Bridgewater. Yeah. So we showed up on time, usually 15 minutes ahead. Plus you get a better seat. And we were. This was real key too. He said he'd have us little envelope, and that was their meal money. I said, well, I got $7. $7 is probably worth a lot more. So $7, we can buy a whole lot of food for that. We'd go to maybe a steakhouse, and it was fun. But we would get on that bus, and we had our coat and tie jacket on. And he said, and he had a great baseball mind. They call it a great baseball man, but. He would analyze situations, and I think he was here 32 years coaching baseball, and my friend Greg Waters became the successor after him.
Oh, athletic director or baseball coach?
So the baseball coach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then Ray Hedrick now is doing a great job too. Yeah. So we stay connected. Yeah. But the team, 1977 team. It kind of came together. Mickey Bordeaux was another friend. He was a soccer player and baseball player. So we got a bid. Billy Wood who's pitched here earlier. His brother Dana's now a softball coach. And Danny, the other brother, had gone to Manatee Junior College and came here to play baseball too. Billy would pitch batting practice, and so we had a real good year that year. We were playing VCU, William & Mary, Georgetown, and we had transitioned to the ODAC conference, I think about 76. Lynchburg was a real powerhouse. And Hampton-Sydney was always their arch rival, and I played ball with some of these guys I'll share with you on my Lester Jackson story. But we got a bid to go to the NCAA Division II tournament in Valdosta, Georgia. And we were classified then; it had transitioned to Division III. But we're playing most of these, a lot of the D1s and beating them. So they recognized you guys got a good team. So Billy Wood said he talked to Coach Stevens too, and I think helped him, said, hey, give the guys a chance, let them go. So here we are. This is the first time I'd ever flown. So we leave, and the exams are right in the background. So much for the being an athlete. They said, well, you still can take those exams when you come back. I said, I remember taking a couple books on the airplane, but this first time a few of us had flown. I think it was Southern Airways. And I have a picture somewhere of us going up the ramp. So we're like in our minds major leaguers. Yeah. So the teams were West Georgia and Valdosta State. And they had us, Jay Pace was the Herald Progress at the time. And I remember something coming through on the prompters mentioning the Herald Progress and Randolph-Macon's update. So there were 4 teams in the division, and this is when it turned my attention. I said, this is like we would maybe, if we were lucky, play 25 games, possibly 30. They play a lot more now, and it gets still cold here in February. But a lot of these teams were heading south, and they said we play like 50, 60 games a year, and they've got an actual stand with cheerleaders. And I said, this is a very good team. So the Division II tournament, we lost 2 games, and we didn't embarrass ourselves, but at that level, a few of those guys, I think, turn pro, and you start to see that not that they're better athletes, but they're playing all the time, and little things make a difference. But we held our own and came back, and I said, when I got back, I said, we got exams in 2 days. It wasn't like, well, y'all have a waiver because you're athletes, but that's good because it keeps you focused and what you're here for. But it was a fantastic experience. And then my senior year, we went to the ODAC tournament. We lost some players. They graduated. And so back to my senior year, this was the 1978 ODAC tournament. And we played at that time, let's see, it shows Lynchburg College, which was their arch rival, and Hampden-Sydney was in it, and Bridgewater, and then Randolph-Macon. So that's a list. There were 36 numbers there. So that was fantastic times. And I'll share with you, if I can, about Lester Jackson.
Yes, please do, because we've heard.
So that's my baseball story. Yeah. So Lester Jackson, rest his soul, when I came here as a freshman, and I'm a week early, and he said there was a gentleman in the dining hall, Lester Jackson, and just real welcoming guy. And he said, he was a food supervisor, and he said, you play a little baseball out here? I said, yes, sir. And he always nicely dressed, had a tie on, and I think back then I probably had blue jeans on all the time. He said, well, just come through here. And there was a couple, the Fisters or Feisters, that there were maybe 900 students here, give or take. And she remembered every number. You had a number you would give them when you came in, like your number 972. I said, I can't even remember my number, and she knew everybody's number.
Oh, my goodness.
So talk about recall. But Lester would come to the games, I noticed, and I said, you like sports, don't you? And he said, yeah, quite a bit. I played a little ball back in the day. I said, oh, you did? And he said, baseball. And I said, that's nice. And he would come to the games, and he met my dad would come, and my mother wouldn't sit with my father because he would yell too much. So she and my aunt, her sister, would sit down at the other end, and my dad would. There were a couple other professors, Dr. Acey and Dr. Panel. They called them the PA system. And back in that day, I don't know if times are different, but it was another player on your side with these guys up there yelling. Greg Waters' dad, I can remember him saying, "Lost Tater." And that environment, we just had a bench. We didn't have the fancy dugouts. And there was another gentleman, Snookums, that would come visit us. He was like, he kicked the day off, just local person, great guy. So Lester would be there, and I said he'd be holding court. Everybody knew him in town. And so that in my freshman year, I started getting a whole lot of playing time. It was like, everything's working out good. Hey, I'm not going home saying I didn't make the grade, so Dad will be happy. And in summer ball, we played summer ball. Lester said, well, look, why don't you, I got a little team called the Brown Grove Spiders. Why don't you come work out a little bit if you got a chance and you might enjoy it? I said, all right. So we go to a local field, and I get out there, and I said, some big guys out here, and we're like college age, 18 to 21 is what I'm used to. And I said, these are grown men. He said, well, a couple of these guys play pro ball, and that's what guy's about 6'4" and 250. He said, well, you might want to, he said, well, go and take a little action at third base and then outfield, and we can catch you some. And I said, yes, sir. So the first guy up, there were a couple guys, I remember the Freeman brothers that played in that league, and we also had a city league. But anyway, he said, just go and take a few ground balls. So I think the first guy hit one I never saw, and he's... And I said, the ball's coming mighty quick. He said, well, you might want to back up a couple steps. He played for this team. And I said, next thing, they're hitting them 350, 400 feet. And my dad came to the practice. He said, it's a pretty good team here. So anyway, he said, and I guess he said, and one thing we like to run. And I had some wheels back then. He said, when you're normally on first base, in college ball is great. It's real structured, but Coach Stevens did a great job. So but Lester Jackson said, when you're out here, we normally when you're on first base, he said, you put the pressure on the outfield. He said, we won't expect you to be on second and third to make this team, is what he's saying. I said, oh, yeah. So I'm like automatically going to second. And they're like timing us. He's like, yeah, he's got his watch. And
wow.
So anyway, after that, he said, well, I got good news if you want. He said, you on the team. So I think I've been through a tryout. He gives me a nice uniform. I said, this is a real nice uniform. These guys said, welcome to the team. There were a couple other guys, so as we get into it, there were a couple other guys that had played for Hamden Sydney that were on the team, and mostly an African-American team, and so we played, they called it barnstorming. He said, well, here's your schedule. And I remember playing in Fredericksburg, a team, the Valentine Bees, and I'm playing left field. And a lot of them are open fields, no fence sometimes. Yeah. He said, just play back. I said, don't worry. That's that same guy that hit one by my head. And just a great group. And later, while I'm thinking about it, there was the Brown Grove team. It introduced me to a lot of guys in the Ashland community. They had softball teams. One was they called it the Bee Gees after Brown Grove. Okay. And then I played on a bus company team, the GRTC team in Richmond. There was a gentleman, Doug, they called him Sook Williams, that would be in the library reading here. He was an assistant coach on that team, and he passed away a few years ago. But he would, playing softball, a lot of these guys had played like football at HBCUs, and some great athletes, and just super guys. And I remember Doug saying, well, he can play the outfield too, because he had seen me play here on that team. So Lester, once I graduated, I'd stay in touch, and Dr. Moreland that was here too, I'd stay in touch with. And Lester was born in 1915. My dad was 1916, so they hit it off real well, and they would talk a lot of baseball. And so I went to see Lester. This is 1991 he passed away. So 1990 I gave him a call and said, Lester, I'd like to have lunch with you one day if that's okay. He said, by all means. So I go to his house, and I said, well, you played some ball you told me about. He said, yeah, I played a little bit. And And I got him talking. I just got quiet. He said he had played, it turned out, and I've been in touch with the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City. They know about him too. Turned out Lester had been a pitcher and outfielder in the old Negro Leagues in segregated times. In the Ashland History Museum, a lot of the, it's hard getting a lot of the information from that era. The Negro Leagues just celebrated the 100th year, the anniversary. And turned out Lester had played for the Newark Eagles, which in segregated times was the highest you could get up to, as the equivalent of the, any major league team. And Ashland History Museum states that he played with Jackie Robinson, Josh Gibson, and Satchel Paige, which were not only great players, but significant in the time. So Lester was hanging out with baseball royalty. And he also told me, he said, a gentleman by the name of Brooks Robinson, the Baltimore Orioles Hall of Fame third baseman previously from years back, would stop by and visit him. And turns out Lester had been a scout for the Cleveland Indians for 20 years, and he worked at Randolph-Macon. He was very humble, and he never bragged. And Brooks Robinson's daughter, Diana, ends up coming to Randolph-Macon. And there was a gentleman, Champ, that worked here, Dickie Champ. And he told me, this is after Lester had passed away, and I said, Dickie, Lester told me about Brooks Robinson. He said, yeah. He said, he and Lester were real good friends, and there was a plaque in the dining hall a few years back. So anyway, I mentioned to the school there's a scholarship in Lester's name, and I said it'd be nice if we could do a Lester Jackson Day. And but just prince of a guy, and he's a few of the guys I play ball with I've been in touch with, but he just he was like one of those special people that makes Randolph-Macon special. But he was with baseball royalty. I said I thought I'd seen some great athletes, which I did, but he was, very glad. Yeah, he played with them. So to play at that level in 9 years, he was the real super person and athlete, very humble, but yeah, he was very dedicated to school. Everybody that knew him here had a lot of good things to say about him.
Was he from Ashland?
He's from Ashland, and I think it was the Hanover Technical Center maybe before.
Where John Gandy.
Yeah, before John. That's correct, and in those times that was where the African American community went to school, and they said he became, in the article it says at the age of 18 he became a coach and went to the Florida leagues, and those guys would play. It wasn't anything for them they play 2 games in the morning and travel to play in another state that night. And those times were very challenging. And so he was just having that connection. This year for the Hall of Fame induction, there's a player going into the Cooperstown. And I actually wrote Cooperstown, and I wrote an article that to the Richmond Times-Dispatch, which got published, and mentioned Randolph-Macon. And I've had a lot of people that have commented. The schools saw it and they recognized it, and it's just like a lot of people were. So I wrote a letter to the Cooperstown, to the Hall of Fame, and they've archived the letter. I got a acknowledgement from the president at Cooperstown at the Baseball Hall of Fame, so they know about Lester and just sharing that story.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it was, but great teams, and I said we were barnstorming teams, and you would go into a game, and I'd never seen this. I later played softball at a place called Lux Field for a team, the Regular Social Club, and on a given Sunday, it was just like Lester's teams. You go in, and there'd be selling concessions, and it was just I remember the music and the just atmosphere, and the guys, you had to be able to play, and it was a big nice social atmosphere for us. just like we do here at Randolph-Macon.
Well, it kept you playing ball all year.
Yeah, and I played. We play sun up, sun down. That's what we did. I worked construction in the until like 5 in the afternoon during the summers, and stay in shape, and so I guess it worked. So I love ball, so it's any sport. So
yeah, great.
So that was a good time.
Speaking about the the integrated team at the Brown Grove, some of the first African American students who came to Randolph-Macon were student athletes. Not all, but in their early years, but a lot were. But I was looking through the yearbooks. I couldn't tell, but were there any black players on your baseball team during those years?
Good. There were none. And interesting thing, I later, and I was playing in this summer league, and probably there were maybe maybe 5 to 10 players in the whole league. There were white players, and the African American community, they were very accepting. They welcomed me with open arms. I played in a softball league years back, probably 25 years ago, and I never thought about it. I was the token white person in the whole league, and these guys, I had a team that was a softball team, and it was mediocre at best. And the coach said, he said, "I know you know a few ball players. Can you pick up some players?" I said, "Well, how good do you want to be?" And he said, "Well, I'd like to win." So I made a phone call, and a couple of these guys, they were nice guys, but just weren't always showing up every night. So I made a phone call back to that Lester Jackson connection with Brown Grove, and we could all play our positions, and we were like, you knew what the other was going to do, and that other guy's going to be on second base. You hit behind the runner, and we won the league. And I had a couple guys that were power hitters. They were like hitting them up on the tennis courts at West Hampton High School, and they're like, "Where'd you get these guys from?" I said, "Well, they're all friends of mine from, Hanover," and they hitting the ball out in the streets. And Coach said, he said, "Good job on your recruiting." I said, "Thanks, Lester," but that was that connection that he introduced me to. But our teams back then were all white teams, and my high school was integrated, and Coach Susie, we were it was in the heart of right in the busing movement, and I was in the minority, and we played summer ball everywhere, the playgrounds of Richmond, and so this was just the time.
It looked like
we were a white team.
From what I
much.
gathered, basketball and football integrated.
Yeah,
First.
A real good friend I had, Roger Brown, was a classmate of mine. He played on the football team, and Roger and I were just hit it off real well. We were both psychology majors. I think Roger, I'm pretty sure he was, and I remember he's real good in math. But he played football, and I'd see him. I saw him later. He worked at Bank of America for a while. Another fellow that he was a great player was Fletcher Johnson.
Yeah.
And Fletcher, basketball.
Yeah.
Fletcher was one of the stars in that era, and I still see him around. The nice thing is we'll be at a school in Richmond, and I'll hear, "Hey, Mark," and it's Fletcher. It's just when I came into school here, there's a gentleman out here, I think Mr. Cooper, working out in the yard, and turned out he'd gone to John Marshall High School. We hit it off real well, and so I hope I'm not going to be late for to meet with you, and we talk and just had a good time. But sports is very connected.
Sports is a great icebreaker, and it was a great breakthrough context for African American students, for some that came. But I know you wanted to talk a little bit about you had a story about early days of Randolph-Macon.
Yeah. So, and I've got back, Randolph-Macon was founded 1830. And chartered in Boyton, Virginia. And over the years, I've been back and forth there. Ruins of Randolph-Macon, there's an historical marker, and I walked back there on a snow day and took a few pictures. And And so I've been in touch. My family, we have a Methodist church, dates back to 1838. We're still going in Southampton County, Virginia. I'm the trustee, treasurer, historian, which means I'm the one out in the church cemetery, 2 acres, getting up leaves yesterday. So, but it's my ancestral church, and looking back, there I have pictures from way back. I have a picture of my great grandparents on their wedding day, 1862, and the significance of that is my great grandfather. His name was Junius Person. This is, and he was married in 1862 to my great grandmother was a Francis, Ann Eliza Francis, and he was a member of the church, and so his father was John A. Person. So I'm the 5th generation, but so my great grandmother Ann Eliza. I'm in the Library of Virginia a lot, and back to researching here. One thing Randolph-Macon did, it was nice. I could come in here at 11:30 at night and sit and read books, and I love history. And I had Dr. Porter and Dr. Scanlon I've stayed in touch with. And Dr. Scanlon, when you think you're a scholar, you realize there's someone that knows more than you. And I'd say my family's also another story, donated Nat Turner's Bible to the Smithsonian. But I ran a few items by Dr. Scanlon, and I've written what I thought was a nice paper. This was a couple years ago, and he said, I said, he sure is taking a long time in that room back there, and came back and had some red marks on it. And I said, I guess I'm not getting an A in your class, son. He said, one thing he stressed, though, he said, you want to make sure everything's accurate and factual. And I had a few things I had to tweak and before I submitted a paper. And so we still stay in touch. I can send him an email, and like the open door policy, which makes it nice. And Dr. Porter I've stayed in touch with too. I had him for world history and Western civilization, and he was very good on being factual and right. We had the little blue booklets that you write your exams in. Someone said they still use them. But my story on the church, so going back to Boynton, I'm researching, and my great-grandmother, Ann Eliza, her brother, there's a book called Southerners All, and it mentions F.N. Boney as the author, and he mentions in the book, he has a picture of, he mentions the Francis name, and this is where my family gets connected, and said that Tinker Francis, and he was a Civil War soldier, had attended Randolph-Macon College briefly. And so I'm in the Library of Virginia one day, and then I pulled up, he has a brother, William Samuel Francis, my great-grandmother. There were 9 children. And it says, William Samuel Francis attended Randolph-Macon College. Well, I contact the archives here, and is it Anna maybe? One of the nice ladies.
Well, there's Laurie Preston and Katie Hall.
Okay.
In the archives.
So and I said, I'm just going from a leave, but I said, I think my great uncle was a Randolph-Macon student. Well, they went into the vault, and she sent the form back, said they had the ledger from 1850. William Samuel Francis, Randolph-Macon, 1850. So he was a student in Boynton. And back then, Dr. Scanlon's written 2 books on the history, and I have both books. And believe me, I probably have to buy another one. I've worn them out. But I think back then, the students, there was maybe 60 to 90, 100 students. And he would have been 19 years old, born in 1831. It all fell into place. So his brother Tinker went to Randolph-Macon briefly, and at our old church, Person's Church, we're celebrating our 184th year. There was my great-grandfather, Junius, was a member of he was a Civil War officer, Pickett's Division, And I've been in touch with another ODAC team, Washington and Lee. Junius goes to University of Virginia, class of 1854. And then in 1855, which back in that day was unusual for anyone going to school. And that picture is taken on his wedding day in 1862. He was a first lieutenant. He was an officer in the Civil War. And the times now, we've seen a lot, but it's I feel something that if people communicate, it's history, and it's not to be offensive, but it's really background. He later goes to Washington and Lee, which was then called Lexington Law School, and I've been in touch with Lexington, and they verified he was in the Southampton County, Virginia. He was a student at Lexington Law School where he studied law, and so I've been in touch with, and I mentioned the Randolph-Macon, they know that connection, but the early days in education, but at the church there was a unit of Civil War soldiers that were attached to the 3rd Virginia Infantry, and so I've been involved with that. Behind the church, Nat Turner, that led the famous Southampton insurrection, was baptized a mile away from our church on Person's Mill Pond. And I put all this together, and back to my Randolph-Macon roots, and Dr. Scanlon, I verified everything, and next thing, we had the Bible of Nat Turner in the family for over 100 years, and where I kind of came into play, my Uncle Morris had it, who attended the church, and it was given to Morris by it passed down from his father and mother, and it's about the size of your cell phone, so we didn't talk about it a whole lot. It's a lot of people you can't have a civil conversation, but it's part of history. Well, long story short, that Bible was donated to the Smithsonian. The timing was right, to use a term from Dr. Martin Luther King. The time is always right to do what is right. And the time was right to donate that Bible. They were building a new African American museum. So we thought in the story, it's donated. A curator comes out and looks at the Bible, and he knew that it was compact, and it had been set up in the closet to keep the sunlight out of it. And he takes back to the Smithsonian, and next thing they contact us. Well, Morris, getting on up in years, and his stepdaughter Wendy has 2 small children, and next thing we're getting contacted, she said, "Well, you kind of take this rollover," and I'd studied everything, the factual information. I had the pictures, and it was authenticated. The Bible had belonged to Nat Turner. Turns out he was baptized on our land, and we're going back 1828. He baptized as a white man named Brantley, and my great-great-grandfather, they had known each other, and everybody's welcome on the land. Well, the significance of that Bible, next thing Oprah Winfrey hears about the Bible. She's one of the major donors, and that Bible, 2000, they break ground like around 2012, and the next thing we're being contacted, CBS News Sunday morning, and they said, when they called, and I didn't say, well, like, this is going to happen, you don't know what's going to be published, and next thing, National Geographic, CBS News Sunday morning, I said, that's the head editor contacting me, and would you be willing to do an interview? And I said, sure. It wasn't any money involved. We donated the Bible. Then there was a movie called Birth of a Nation, Nate Parker. Back to my great-grandfather, gone to UVA, a gentleman. This ties into the Black History Month, too. Dr. Marcus Martin, at the time, President Teresa Sullivan is the president. And I said, I have a PowerPoint I can, if you're interested, and I'll show, and it covers Nat Turner, the Bible, and our history, and And they said, well, you do a presentation at UVA. So I did. And they said, it's a gentleman named Nate Parker that's doing a movie, and he'd like to meet you. And I said, well, that'd be all right. And the film crew came to the church about 6 months before it's finished. The scene of the baptismal was shown in the movie, and Nate Parker, he's from Norfolk, Virginia, and like a lot of people said, Nat Turner wasn't discussed a whole lot. It was it was kind of a little short story in maybe the history books, but next thing, that Bible was at the Smithsonian, and out of I think 138 million, it's one of the 101 that helped change America, they said, and it's been sitting next to Harriet Tubman's shawl. It's that significant.
Wow.
So I've been heavily involved with that. Back to my research, and so but that old church, here we are, 184 years old, and it's a cemetery that dates back. It's a Confederates, and the nice thing, the reconciliation part of the Turner family has come to our reunions and with open arms, and they've been there's a show, Virginia Currents, and Mrs. Hawkins, who's a Turner descendant, we're both in that, and filmed at the church, and we actually go to the land where he's captured about 3 miles away. So we feel that Bible's in the best place, and generation 100 years from now we'll still see it. The Bible's 240 years old, and it's real fragile. So the significance is pretty incredible. But the history I loved, and I had the pictures all the elders passed down to me, and there's a show, the 700 Club, came out in New York Times, and someone saw me out. They saw me in a coat and tie. They said, "Someone your family passed away?" I said, "No, just dressed up." They're doing, and then it all, like a perfect storm, it just all hit at one time. The dedication of the new museum, I was there that day when President Obama spoke, and and George Bush and Jesse Jackson, and Stevie Wonder was one of my music heroes. He actually played that day, and Patti LaBelle, and so very significant day. So that
Great you were there, though.
Yeah, so it was like pretty incredible, and it was as we were going in back to the sports, a gentleman walks by with two of his friends, and it was Carl Lewis, the Olympian. He had donated several of his gold medals to the museum, but very nice. So I try to go back annually. The Bible now is it's very sensitive to light, so it's not in the case now. So they'll eventually, I'm sure, bring it out. A conservator told me that it has to be handled properly, and but that Bible had been in the family. My cousin had taken it to school when she was teaching in her backpack. If you can imagine that, on a little yellow school bus, had it in the backpack for show and tell.
Oh, my goodness.
And then it was in a bank, but the bank was robbed, and they said it was probably safer at home, so it's set in the closet. So, but anyway, the Nat Turner story's very connected to that old church in Southampton County.
Well, is that church still an active?
Yeah, we're still active, and they're about, on a good Sunday, we'll have 10 people. We have a reunion when COVID has been a factor, but hopefully this year we'll have 100+ people come back, and families from 6 states, 7, Carolinas, but we do still have service. So it's a little old country church, and we're still plugging, but it dates back to the circuit rider and the Methodist movement. There was Joshua Lee was the first minister, and he ended up marrying a member of the church back in 1838. So real old
right around the
Methodist
same time.
roots like Randolph.
Just the church was established just a few years after the College of Boynton.
And it's interesting. A lot of the people that I've met over the years that are affiliated with the Methodist Church, they all went to Randolph Macon, and it was a big theology school. A lot of theologians. So a lot of strong ties there. Yeah. At the person's church reunions, there'll be people from, and I've had them that said, well, my grandfather went to Randolph Macon and great-grandfather in the 1800s, so it's a lot of connections, especially in Virginia.
Well, that is fascinating. I love all the, history background between your family church in Southampton County, and especially hearing all the stories about Lester Jackson and the baseball. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Are there any other memories or stories of Randolph-Macon you wanted to share?
Yeah, I'll share this one too. This was another gentleman that was. This was from Dr. Moreland, and Earl Moreland. I think there's a statue of him on the grounds here.
Right outside the library. Yes.
A friend of mine, the late Becky Keents, her father, Samuel Hatcher, was the treasurer here years back, and served as the interim president at Randolph-Macon. And he was on the actual committee that hired Dr. Moreland. And Becky and her sister, Jane, would come. She would share stories. And I introduced her. I took her to a networking event a few years back, held over at the Virginia Museum. And I introduced her to Dr. Lingren, and she was like telling these stories, but they would play here. And one thing that stood out, she said her grandfather, and this was when it was all young men's school, and she said anyone that came to school here, he was a smart person, and I think he invested well, and if there was someone who the money was a factor, he made sure they got through. And he was one of the ones that was on the committee to bring in Dr. Moreland. And Dr. Moreland, back in that era, Dr. Moreland loved sports, and he would come to the games. And that era, he had written me a letter, said, "Dear friend Mark, I'm truly grateful for your cordial greetings, and I regret that this response has to be tardy," quotation marks. "I trust all goes well with you. Since baseball," and this is written August of 1982, I'd come back to the games, and you have to support the Yellow Jackets. "I trust all goes well with you. Since baseball is to start soon, I trust you will be paying a visit soon. Please give my best to your dad, to your father. Very best. Always sincerely, J. Earl Moreland." And it's on College Stationery.
Office of the President Emeritus.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the nice thing I'll say too, because everybody is humble. You just never know who you're talking to, and so he was a special person too. So good fella. But my dad, thought a lot of them too. But they'd sit back there, and there was no. Back in that era, now we can pull up the website to see if it's updated with the new game or something.
Right.
And back then they gave you a schedule, and that was it. And I probably lost mine more than I just knew I better show up for practice in the game. And my dad had his own business, and I said, "How'd you know about the game?" He said, "Brother Moreland gave it to me." I said, "Brother Moreland?" I said, "You mean Dr. Moreland?" He said, "Yes, Brother Moreland." He called. That was a
good old
Southern and
religious.
And my dad, he knew everybody, and they'd sit and talk, and Dr. Ace, and it was like old home week back then. One last thing, the old games, we didn't have the electronic scoreboard, so the team sometimes they'd mess the score up, and they'd say, "We just scored 2 runs," and then we got it in the wrong spot. So that environment, and it was just great times. The great memories here. So anytime I'm on 95, I have to ride through here to check things out. So fabulous facilities now, and it's
and the Hugh Stevens baseball.
Yeah, it's quite when the dedication ceremonies came. I actually the Carol Estes, she played first base for us a lot, and her brother Rob, and just right down the street, Carol's brother Rob and mine were college roommates, William and Mary, and he played baseball with us too. And so Mrs. Stevens, I said, "Mrs. Stevens, have you met Carol here?" And so I actually introduced him that day of the dedication. And Mrs. Stevens, last thing I'll share with you, when one of our teammates, John Bueller, passed away a few years ago, and all our team, we all had to have a nickname on the team. We had, I'll tell Melissa, she comes up here to the events with me. I introduced her. I said, well, this is Pie Face, and this is Moose, and that's Picklehead there. And she said, don't you guys have real names? I said, well, that's Lester. And but one teammate, he was quarterback of the football teams, John Bueller, and also our shortstop. He came in the same year I did, and quite the athlete, and he did real well with the old Best Products. Passed away a few years ago. So Dave Bristow, we started talking, and he said, you think we can get the old guys back from that era and maybe raise a few dollars? So we started thinking about it. We said maybe we can raise $1 or $2, and Billy Jones, Pie Face, said, well, I'll contribute. And so next thing we raised money, and there's the Bueller grandstands at Hugh Stevens Field in tribute to John, and it's some of us that gave a little bit of money. And Mrs. Stevens, they had a very nice event. We had it in Birdsong Hall, and Mrs. Stevens was there with us in the picture, and bless her heart, she'd be at every game, and we stayed in touch on Facebook. She was well connected, so that a lot of those folks are no longer with us, but their legacies continue. Yes. But she would have that. She worked in the bookstore, and I'll share this with you too. Anytime I come up here, I have to see my friend Barkley, because she said, you in that hat that I've got here, I said I've got my Randolph Macon socks on, but I'll always be updated after I leave that bookstore with new paraphernalia. And so Barkley's our campus mother.
That's for nice sure. Well, back. I interviewed Barkley DuPriest and Catherine Stevens together for one of these interviews, and I never did have a chance to meet Coach Stevens, but heard so many good things about him. So appreciate those memories.
Yeah, he was a great guy. And one last thing, Coach Stevens, he was years later. We had a alumni game and all, and he said, yeah, you look like you're hitting that curveball pretty good now. Got a good hit that day. And I said, well, am I too old to be a walk-on now? He said, yeah, you might have missed it by a year or two. So it was just a great guy. And,
well, Mark Person, I want to thank you so much for coming in today and sharing all these memories on a wide variety of topics with Making Memories.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Go Jackets.